Hello, learners. Let's dive deep into the exploration of the knowledge. Right? Let's start learning management and its evolution. So we are going to begin with management and its evolution. After reading this unit, you should be able to understand the evolution of management, the foundations of management. Here, the different perspectives of management, the philosophy and approaches of management, the various ideas of management thinkers during their time, the principles of scientific management, the contribution of the behavioral science to management, the contingency approach, systems approach, division theory approach, and other approaches to management. Structure. Introduction would be there, perspectives of management would be there, the empirical classical perspective would be there, human relations approach or the behavioral perspective would be there, the systems approach would be there, decision theory approach would be there, mathematical quantitative approach would be there, contingency theory would be approach would be there, theory X and theory Y would be there, summary, self-assessment questions, references, further readings would be there. Now we are beginning with the introduction, the evolution of management roots back to the contribution of various schools of management thought, which emphasize certain philosophies, approaches as best for managing the organizations. They're referred to as approaches, theories, and provide various perspectives on management. All right, now we are going to see the perspectives of management, right? So the empirical classical approach to management was proposed in the early part of 20th century. To some extent, it is accepted and practiced by many managers even today. The exponents of this school of management emphasized the importance of the study of the experiences of successful managers. They claimed that such a study would provide a better understanding of the most effective way of managing an enterprise. At times, they stressed the need for the study and analysis of the cases. However, critics viewed that management is not like law to be based on the precedent. Management is dynamic, and the situation in which managers take decisions vary considerably to the various to the previous experiences. The separate branches of the classical approach are evident, scientific management, administrative theory, and bureaucracy. Scientific management. This perspective grew out of a need to improve manufacturing efficiency through more effective utilization of physical and human resources. This was proposed by F.W. Taylor, who is considered as the father of scientific management. He observes that the best management is true science, resting upon clearly defined laws, rules, and principles as a foundation. He spent a greater part of his life finding solutions to the problem of achieving greater efficiency on the shop floor. Taylor observed that the workers got used to intentionally delay the process of completing the job and complain about the tools and equipment provided to them of a low standard and obsolete. He identified the need to teach workers that they would not be thrown out of employment if they turn out to more work. The solution suggested by Taylor was the outcome of his own experience at work, initially at the shop floor and later as a manager. He proposed this as the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. Employers gave a high degree of priority to efficient working methods. Taylor was passionately interested in the efficiency of working methods. He initially realized that the systematic analysis of work would find the solution to all the problems and associated with enhancing the efficiency of the working methods. He also realized that this was the only way to address the apprehensions of workers. Taylor thus consolidated his ideas at Bethlehem Steel Company and conducted some of the most famous experiments to improve labor productivity. He has published his work in an article called Principles of Scientific Management in 1911. He was the first person to recognize and emphasize the need for adopting a scientific approach to the task of an enterprise. Elements of scientific management. Scientific management referred to the process of applying scientific principles to management related issues. Scientific management methods call for optimizing the way that tasks are performed and the job simplified so that the workers could be trained to perform specialized sequence of motions in one best way. After years of experiments to determine optimal work methods, Taylor proposed the following four principles of management. Develop a science for each element of an individual's work. This would mean replacing the role of thumb or of this means replacing the role of thumb work methods with methods based on a scientific study of the task. Prior to, the workers used approximation which was derived from their experience. Scientifically select, train, teach, and develop each worker rather than passively learning them, leaving them to train themselves. Prior to this, workers closed their own work and trained themselves as they could. Heartily cooperate with the workers so as to ensure that work is done in accordance with the principles of science that had been developed. Prior to this, management and workers were in continual conflict. Divide work and responsibility almost equally between management and workers. Management would take over all the work for which it is better suited that workers, which means that the managers would apply the scientific management principles to planning the work and workers actually perform the task. Prior to this, almost all the work and the greater part of responsibility was left to the workers. The principles were implemented in many factories and the productivity increased 3 to 4 times. Here, Henry Ford applied Taylor's principles in his automobile factories, and even families began to use these principles in their household tasks. Taylor's experiments. Taylor demonstrated the benefits of increased productivity and earnings through an experiment in Bethlehem Steel Works. Prior to scientific management, work was performed by skilled craftsmen who had learned their work in lengthy apprenticeship. They took their own decisions on the way the jobs have to be performed. Scientific management took away much of their autonomy and converted skilled crafts into a series of simplified jobs that could be performed by unskilled workers who could easily be trained for the task. His interest in improving the workers' productivity could be seen early in his career where he observed gross efficiencies during his contact with the steel workers. Soldering. His work in the steel industry made him observe the phenomena of workers purposely operating well below their capacity, that is, soldering. He attributed this to the following reasons: the almost universally held belief among workers that if they become more productive, fear of them would be needed, thus eliminating some of the jobs. Non incentive wage systems encouraged lower productivity. There were no incentives that were paid as part of the wage, and hence all the employees received that the same pay irrespective of the volume of work produced by them. They believed that the pace with which they did work was good enough with no incentive if the pace of the work is done faster. That would lead to newer benchmarks. Thus, they were working much below their capacity. Workers relied more on the rule of thumb method, thus wasting a lot of their effort and not following the scientific methods to carry out their tasks. Thus, Taylor conducted several experiments to determine the best way of preference performance in each of the tasks. Some of the experiments are time study. To determine the optimal method to perform a job, Taylor conducted the time and motion studies. He used a stopwatch to record the time taken by a worker in the sequence of his movements in the job. His goal was to find out one best way to perform a job. He argued that the most basic task, if planned and done scientifically, could dramatically increase the productivity rather than the incentive method of motivating workers. The basic premise of the initiative and incentive method was to offer an incentive to the worker for increased productivity, but such a method also placed the responsibility of doing it in the best possible way. Pig iron experiment. Some examples of his experiments in time and motion studies are: pig iron experiment. Taylor argued that if the workers were asked to move 12.5 tons of pig iron per day and could be induced to move 4 times of the same per day, they would get exhausted and fail to reach the goal. According to him, if the workers managers could conduct an experiment and arrive at a standard time for their rest, work, etc., their physical abilities could be used to the optimum.